Hey guys, it's Benjamin with Benjamin's Exotics, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about ball python humidity, how to manage it, what is humidity in relation to ball pythons, and overall just do a complete guide on humidity and specifically managing humidity in your ball python's enclosure. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about ball python humidity, how to manage ball python humidity, talk about what it is, the positives and negatives of having too dry or too high of humidity, and just kind of go over an entire guide. I've done a few videos on this recently, but I still see people making errors, and maybe I wasn't quite as clear as I could have been in those videos, but I will link those videos down in the description below as well if you want to check them out. So we talk about humidity across the board for ball pythons, geckos, amphibians, whatever. Humidity is the amount of moisture in the air. So imagine that you walk into like a water park, and the second you walk through the door, you get hit with this just big gush of hot, heavy, wet air. That is an example of a high humidity environment. Or if you're in like a desert, so let's say that you are in, I don't know, sand dunes or the Sonoran Desert or wherever. You're in a desert and it's so dry that your throat starts getting chapped and you just kind of start feeling, you know, very dehydrated. That's an example of a very low humidity environment. And when we talk about ball pythons, the big tricky thing about humidity is that there's not really a good number. Like with temperature, I can tell you guys that as a temperature, you know, I want my hot spot to be around 91, 92, not much over 93, and not below 90 degrees. So maybe 91 and 92, perfect temperature for my hot spot. But when we talk about humidity, it's a little bit trickier. I've seen some people say that it should always be 50% or 60% or 80, or even, I've even heard like 55 or, you know, whatever percent on your humidity. But with humidity, I'll tell you guys right now, there's no number, there's no exact math to it. Humidity is just kind of a spectrum and it's a range. So if you take a ball python like this, so this is a really cool, this is a spider enchy shatter ball python, and if I take this snake and I put it in a very dry environment, so let's say I put it in an environment with just aspen, just the setup we have here, and the humidity in the enclosure is under 30%, okay, which is extremely low. That's like Sonoran Desert level low, okay, like extremely low humidity. You know, we're talking 30 to 40%. This animal's scales, especially on the belly, are going to start to get dry, and you even see some of the top scales on the back of this snake. I've had it before where the scales on this snake's back will actually get kind of like crumply a little bit. Not all of them, and it won't happen to every single scale, but some of the scales will really start to look dehydrated, and also the eyes, okay? Eyes on a ball python, you'll start to see they'll look crumply, like you took a piece of paper and literally like crumpled it up, and you'll just see imperfection in the eyes. Okay, those are all signs of an environment that is way too low in humidity. And again, when I say low humidity, I'm talking below probably 40%. 50% is not horrible, but definitely higher would be a little bit better. And then let's talk about what happens if you have too high of humidity. So too low of humidity, again, snake's just going to be, you know, kind of dehydrated, not very comfortable, and just like, you know, with your skin. Think about in the winter time when we turn on the heater and it sucks out all of the hot air, your skin gets dried out. Same thing with the snakes, okay? And that can cause them to not feed and have all kinds of problems like that. Here is a pastel clown. Now let's imagine that I took this snake and I treated it like a toad. Okay, I manage all kinds of animals here at Benjamin's Exotics, reptiles, amphibians, whatever. Let's say I treated this guy like an American toad. So I had a setup in here where the humidity is like, let's say 80 or 90%, and this snake is constantly sitting on wet bedding. Okay, if I do that, I'm going to get multiple problems. First of all, when you have heat plus moisture in an environment like this that's relatively, I mean, it's not extremely low ventilation, but it's not very high ventilation, you're going to encourage the growth of fungus, bacteria, stuff like that, and that of course can cause the snake all kinds of problems. I'm not going to say that that would absolutely cause a respiratory infection, but definitely if you had a high humidity environment with low temperatures where the animal's immune system is suppressed, in theory you could actually get things like respiratory infection, definitely scale rot. If the snake is sitting on wet bedding for a long time, you will get things like scale rot, blister disease, all kinds of other problems with the skin, even like an infection where you get like this bubbly kind of lesions on the bottom of the snake's inside of the snake's skin. It's just not a good situation, and that again is the result of an environment that would be like 90% plus, okay? Almost like if you look at an egg. Like here's some ball python eggs. The lamp thing is kind of in my way a little bit, but if we look at these eggs, okay, in here, this environment is probably 90%. See how we have all that condensation near the eggs? You don't want it to be that high in your enclosure, because if you get it like that, that will cause you problems. Okay, so let's first take a look at how to raise the humidity in your ball python's enclosure. So if I take an enclosure like this, there are really three ways that you can raise the humidity. The first and the most common, which is going to give you the most problems, is to spray down the enclosure. Now, while that will raise the humidity, it will also encourage the growth of bacteria, fungus, protozoa, and increase the chances that your snake, because it's sitting on wet bedding, is actually going to get things like scale rot, blister disease. I even see sometimes they get like these lesions literally on the side of the snake because the bacteria somehow penetrates the snake's skin. It's just not a good situation. And even if you only spray down the enclosure a little bit, just kind of only for the purposes of this video, what I actually did before I came in and took this tub out is I did one quick spray just on the front of this enclosure with my sprayer thing, okay? And just one thing, you can literally see this bedding, whether it be aspen or a coconut fiber, whatever, is absorbing, and over time it's going to move to be on the snake. So even if you only soak down a little bit of the front of the enclosure, eventually it's still going to encourage mold growth and such, and when your snake's sitting on wet bedding, the chances of getting things like scale rot, etc., not going to be good for your snake. The only time that you want to spray down an enclosure or soak it down is when a snake is shedding. So if I take a snake like this is a Mojave female that just had her pre-lay shed. You can't tell right now, but about, let's say for the last week or so, I had this entire enclosure soaked. I'll literally take this water bowl, dump it, and take my sprayer and soak down the entire enclosure when the snakes are in shed. And just to kind of show you what my sheds look like, those are some of my last sheds for the past few months or so, okay? And her shed literally is this right here. So, I mean, you can see they have great sheds with that system, but that's only going to be for maybe a week, okay? If you have a snake on soaked bedding for weeks and weeks on end, again, you are going to get problems like scale rot. So the other two ways that you can raise the humidity are the best ways to do it, and are basically two things: are increasing the size of the water dish and ventilation. Now for your water dish, it's pretty simple. You don't want to go with height as much as girth, as much as basically surface area. So if I took a water bowl like that, and let's say for whatever reason I live in a desert or I live in some very dry environment where the average humidity in my house is very low, and I want to raise the humidity in the snake's enclosure, I could take a water dish that was more this size. This is obviously not a water dish, but this is kind of a good way to show it, okay? If I took a water dish that's just that much bigger, more surface area, the humidity is going to go up as this evaporates without making the bedding wet and encouraging the growth of bacteria. The other way you can do it, in a way that I have had a lot of success, is managing the ventilation. Ventilation is the amount of airflow in the enclosure, so an enclosure that didn't have any of these air holes would have almost no ventilation, and of course an enclosure that's just kind of a free to have all kinds of ventilation would be something like this, where it has two massive lines of holes on each side of the tub, okay? Now, here's a cool thing that you can do. Take a tub like this, and I know this is not applicable for everybody, but if you can actually look at the side of this tub, you can hopefully see that right about, oh, come on, focus. I love how this is, okay, right here. Do you see how there's tape? You can see kind of a little line, it's very faint, but I have this office tape, and it's just perfect for covering the air holes in this tub. And I have it taped from, I'm not going to put my finger there anymore because it's kind of knocking it off, but it starts there and it goes all the way back, and it covers most of the air holes to the point where I only have maybe 5 or 6 holes on the front of the tub that are not covered. Okay, and it's the exact same thing on the other side. The great thing about this is that I can actually now manage the amount of ventilation and therefore manage the amount of airflow and humidity in my enclosure. So if I had a new ball python, let's say I had ball pythons just coming out of the incubator, and I want them to have a very good first shed. I'm probably going to put them in a tub like this, and I'm literally going to cover almost every single hole with this, with just one big line. Now, literally nothing fancy, just kind of this clear office tape. You don't want to use something like duct tape or any sort of tape that's going to have a really sticky residue, just something basic like this, not too sticky, nothing fancy, just like office tape. And I'm going to cover probably all the way to here, so from the back to here, and I'm only going to have 2 holes in the front for a newly hatched baby ball python so that the humidity is very high and they have a really good first shed. Or let's look at the opposite. Let's say this snake, it doesn't, but let's say the snake had scale rot, okay, and I want to make the enclosure very dry. I can take off all of the tape and essentially have one entire line on each side of ventilation, leading to a very low humidity environment. So this is a great system, and again, you have to be creative with this. I've seen some people on the vivariums, they'll take like a drainage thing for a sink, and they'll put a plug in it that comes with the drainage thing, whatever you want to call it, on your vivarium. I've seen people cover the tops of aquariums with things like boards or maybe even like a wet towel or whatever. So you kind of have to think, if you want to manage your humidity, you have to find a balance, okay? Spraying down the enclosure doesn't work. You have to find a balance between picking a bigger water dish or managing your humidity. And if you guys are doing tubs, I highly recommend, you have to do a pretty straight line, but if you can do this, this is a fantastic method because it's a very cheap, very simple alternative to being able to not only, of course, we can manage the heat with our thermostats, but now with this, you can actually take off more tape or put on more tape to manage the airflow and humidity inside of your ball python's enclosure. And then, of course, just kind of to end off the video, I don't even really need to say this, but if you want to make your enclosure drier, okay, having less humidity, smaller water dish, more ventilation, simple as that. So overall, I hope you guys did enjoy and most importantly benefit from today's video. If you liked the video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.